I want to tell you something about Michele because she's an amazing person. She's the CEO and founder of Soaring Spirits International, a nonprofit providing programs and resources for widowed people globally. And Michele, it's a really fascinating story about how her husband died, and she set up this program, Soaring Spirits, and I'll have to say she did it on her credit card. She did her first conference. I'll never get over that. It still gets me. She charged all the rooms on her credit card. She's the author of A Different After You, Rediscovering Yourself and Healing After Grief and Trauma. And she was honored in 2021 in the top 10 CNN heroes and was featured in Apple TV documentary Gutsy. Well, so thank you for moderating this panel today. And Heidi's going to introduce the panel for us.
Thank you, Michele, and thanks to the panel members here today. Jill Johnson-Young. Jill is a licensed clinical social worker and a co-founder and owner of Central Counseling Services. Jill is twice widowed and now married to a funeral director. Jill hosts a Friday, she hosts a Friday grief chat with Deborah Joy Hart. It's on humor, grace, and grief, and you can find it on Facebook Live. She has published 5 books, the most recent being The Rebellious Widow. That sounds like a good one. Welcome to the panel, Jill.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And next we have, I'm not going in any order, Karla Wheeler. Karla co-heads the Public Relations and Marketing Committee for Open to Hope. She is on our board of directors. She is the founder and president of Quality of Life Publishing Company, a national publishing firm specializing in grief support books. Karla is the author of grief books for adults and children and writes bereavement columns for newspapers and magazines across North America. Several of Karla's family members have experienced a good death thanks to hospice, including her 54-year-old husband. Karla is also a longtime hospice volunteer in Florida. Welcome, Karla.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you all.
And then last but not least, we have Abel Keogh. Abel is a relationship coach and an expert on widower relationships. He is the author of 6 books, including The Wife in the Next Life, Room for Two, and Dating a Widower. His Dating a Widower YouTube channel contains valuable advice for widowers and the women who are dating or married to them. Welcome, Abel. I am going to turn the panel over now to Michele. Thank you all.
I am so excited to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for lending your expertise to this panel. I wanted to just begin by acknowledging that we are all widowed ourselves. And so in order to do that, if we could just introduce ourselves, our person or people's names, how long you've been widowed, and what was the cause of death for your people. And so I'll end with myself, but let's start, if we can, with Karla. Hi, Karla.
Sure. Hi there. Thank you, Michele. My husband, Jerry, and I were married for 28 wonderful years. He was an extremely healthy 54-year-old man, and out of the blue, he developed stage 4 cancer and died 6 weeks later. So that's my story. I am very blessed. I did remarry 4 years ago. A wonderful man. So I'm extremely blessed.
Wonderful. Well, it's glad to have you. Thank you so much, Karla. Abel.
Yeah, my late wife's name was Krista. I was widowed young. She was 26 when she died, and I was widowed back in 2001. And Krista took her own life, so it was suicide. But like Karla, I've remarried, and actually me and my now wife, I guess, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last week.
Wow, congratulations.
Nice.
Glad to have you, Abel. Thank you. Hi, Jill.
Hey, so I am Jill. I was married to Linda for 23 years. She had stage 3 breast cancer. She beat that. She died breast cancer free. She died of pulmonary fibrosis 13 years ago next month as a result of the chemotherapy that they had to use to give her the extra time that we had. And while she was sick, she told me that I was going to marry her hospice nurse, Casper. And we told her she was crazy. And then it turned out she was right. We did get married. And then we ended up being introduced to Lewy body dementia, which is what caused Robin Williams to take his life. And after 3 short years with early onset Lewy body, she died in 2013. And now I am married to the funeral director who took care of both of them. And we've been married 9 years this year.
I always like how you wrap up your story, Jill, when we've talked about this before. So I'll briefly say that my late husband, Philip, was killed in a cycling accident when he was 39. I was 35. We had a blended family of 6, and it has been 17 years since he died. So I have been widowed for quite a while, and we do have kind of a great sort of stretch of how long people have been widowed and at what ages. So I'm eager to dive into the questions. We're going to kind of bounce around. And so I want to just direct our questions one at a time to each of you. And if anybody has a burning desire to answer that same question, please just, give me a signal and we'll go to you. Otherwise, I'll give each one of us different questions to sort of look at the scope of widowhood and how it's influenced each of us, as well as what we've found helpful as we've moved through. So starting with maybe Jill, if you would. Jill, I know I think I would love actually for you to answer this from both perspectives, from your 2 different experiences with widowhood, but what part of widowhood did you initially find to be the most challenging?
There are 2 parts. One was I had 3 teenage girls at the time,
Oh,
so
yeah.
that's challenging all by itself,
Yeah.
and managing their responses. But more than anything, it was managing other people's need to have input as to how I did widowhood and what I needed to do for me and for the kids, and what boundaries I needed. And those boundaries frequently, folks trying to help in a way that trod all over those boundaries, and needing to be able to say, nope, this is my space, get out of my hula hoop.
Isn't
Right.
it amazing how many people have opinions? And,
Especially
and
people
how
who've
those-
never walked it.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. Abel, did you have that experience as well? Did you find that people felt like they needed to tell you how you do things?
Well, I think for me, when I was widowed younger, I think most people didn't know what to say to me. So my biggest
Yeah.
challenge was just kind of adjusting to actually being alone. I mean, most of my
Mhm.
friends, because I was widowed young, they, I had friends that weren't even married or things like that. And I think people, in my experiences, they didn't know what to say to me. They didn't know what to do with me. And so my biggest challenge was just learning how to be alone. It was so hard for me to come home and have nobody there,
Mhm.
and have nobody, kind of like some of the purpose of my life was gone. I'd been working. My wife was expecting when she took her own life, and so it's like suddenly all the stuff I'd been looking forward to was gone. And I think that was, just not having a purpose and coming home to an empty house were the biggest challenges for me.
Yeah. What would you say was one of the things you did to help yourself through that?
I learned to be a lot more proactive about just going out and trying to find things to do. I think, the worst thing I could have done was just sit at home with nothing to do. And so I really learned just to kind of be proactive and call people or try to set things up, or even if I was just going out and doing something by myself, just, doing something that would give me, trying to find an activity that would give me kind of a purpose or something to look forward to that day.
Yeah. I love that. And I love the idea of it just having to be for that day, right? Like we could just find one thing to look forward to today. It doesn't have to be a long-term thing. It could even be a short-term thing. What about you, Karla? Did you find being alone initially difficult?
No, I did not. I mean, as far as the losing my dear husband and that male companionship, yes. But I found that because Jerry's illness came on so suddenly, and we have such a large family, so many of whom just, were in shock and missed him so much. What I found was that I was trying to tend to everyone's needs, especially our 14-year-old daughter, but then his younger brothers, his poor bereaved mother, all the cousins and everybody else who loved him so much. So I found the first months I was tending to everyone else's needs and forgetting my own. And then I was able to find that space to nurture myself and be gentle with myself. So I think just being gentle with ourselves is one of the biggest lessons I learned, because our to-do lists just become huge because we think that we need to be on top of all the things that he was on top of, plus the things that I was on top of. And so I find just deep breaths and be gentle with ourselves when we're widowed really helps.
That's such great advice. And that leads me actually to ask this next question about what is it that you wish you had done differently in your widowhood? And I want to just start by acknowledging that I felt a little bit like I wanted to rush through, like I wanted to check off all the boxes. So that if I hurried, I think that my thinking was if I hurried up and checked all the boxes, then I could move through this more quickly. But the results of that time for me was that I didn't give myself enough time to just feel my feelings. And so I'm curious, Jill, is there anything you would do differently, or anything that you would like to add to this sort of idea of what might we do to support ourselves in that early part of widowhood?
I wish I had carved out more time off
Mm,
each time to give myself a little more adaptation time.
that's
I
great.
wish I had been firmer in those boundaries initially. And I wish I had really taken a moment. I'd done blogging so I could fill people in what was going on, but I wish that I had been really clear about when you have been a caregiver for someone who's been ill for a very long time, then you have done anticipatory grief for literally years. And so you are in a different space in your grief than other people who are on the outside looking in and weren't integrated into that or didn't integrate themselves. So they were still in that spot where, they wanted us to take care of them and acknowledge their grief. And I was already over here restructuring my life,
Mhm.
and it created conflict. And I wish that I had minimized some of that by just saying flat out, you guys didn't do your grief when I did, so you got to do yours someplace else.
I also love that you brought up that for our widowed people who are caregivers, there's just so much emotional energy, mental energy, physical energy that goes into that we really have to think about how to really be careful and care for ourselves in the aftermath of that, because it's
Right.
its whole other thing, right? Like, it's in addition to grieving, you're already depleted. And so for any of you out there who have been taking care of someone you love for a long time, or even really a short time, but the longer the time is, I feel like the more depleted we can be by the time it comes to a place where we're ready to manage our own grief.
Go to the doctor, get your labs, get your mammogram. Don't mess around.
Do all the
Yeah.
things. Abel, what about you? Anything you wish you'd known or done differently?
I think for me, it was not getting into a serious relationship so quickly. For me, I think it was just that issue of just not wanting to be alone. So I started dating probably about 5 months after my late wife died. And the dating itself wasn't the issue. I think that was actually good for me, but I think it was jumping into a serious relationship so quickly. And this is not with my now wife, in case she's watching, just so she knows that.
Got to be clear.
Yeah, but I got into a relationship probably a month or so after I started dating. I got into a serious relationship. And I mean, honestly, looking back, it was for the wrong reasons, because I didn't want to be alone. I wanted somebody to kind of be there with. And I think, if I could have done it differently, I think I just would have, I wish I could kind of just go back and say, Abel, you don't, the dating's good for you, but you don't need a relationship right now. Just kind of take your time and go out there and just kind of see what's out there and just kind of just learn kind of what you need in this next chapter of your life.
Yeah, I think it's also such a great theme for, us as a group to talk a little bit about that idea of giving ourselves time, because it can be difficult, one, to shape the time. And as Karla mentioned, it can also be difficult to make ourselves a priority when there's so many other things pulling on us. One of the ways we do that, of course, is by setting boundaries. And Karla, I'm curious, what boundary did you find the most difficult to set, and how did you go about firmly holding that when it was time?
Wow, that's a tough question, Michele, because I think there were so many boundaries that I needed to learn. It's interesting because with the hospice bereavement volunteering that I had done for years, I considered myself an expert. I'm an expert in grief. I know how to grieve. And then when it happened, when my parents both passed, we all know that's a much different type of grief than when our spouse or partner passes. And so I realized that, hey, there are no experts when it comes to grief. And so I found myself going to a support group, going to a counselor, and trying to ask those people to help me to set those boundaries. so I could start that inner healing, because of course I'm just the nurturer who wants to nurture and heal everybody else. So it was quite a journey, and I'm still learning. It's interesting because we all experience those grief attacks where suddenly a song on the radio or something happens and we're reminded of our loved one that we lost. Well, my husband has been gone for 17 years and I'm still having grief attacks. So I'm still learning that way. I'm happily remarried. And yet, something happened recently and I found myself just crying and crying. And I thought, wow, I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to grieve.
Thank you so much, Karla. I hope everyone took away from that it's a great idea to have help when setting your boundaries, that you don't have to, in your own mind, be the only one who's doing it, but that seeking out support while trying to discover how best to support yourself is one of the key things that we can do for ourselves in widowhood. Abel, I'd like to ask you, because Karla so beautifully brought up this idea that we may still be grieving and have grief moments when we are repartnered happily and living a whole different life, one that we didn't expect. One of the things that I have found, I'm also remarried. I've been happily married to my husband for 13 years. And many people, especially in our early relationship, assumed that meant there was no more grief, that we were all done grieving because I was married. And so, that on some level, I think people were happy and others, they were a little surprised to discover that I'd still would have times when I really miss Phil. And, I always think of it this way, I'll never wish he wasn't dead. And so that's going to influence me sometimes and influence my relationship. So I'm curious for you, what was your experience of that? Did people assume that you were done grieving, and how did your grief influence your relationship?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were just worried, like when I got remarried, because I remarried 15 months after my late wife died. And I think, people were, I think, supportive, but I could kind of tell that they were like, what is Abel doing, kind of thing. They were just, I think they were more worried about me and that I was making kind of a mistake, or I guess I was rushing into things. Maybe I wasn't making a mistake, but I was rushing into things. And so, I'm sorry, the question was, how did I deal with
well, I'm just curious how your grief influenced. I mean, as you said, people make this sort of, my people around me and for other people who I've met, they have this sense that, okay, well, then you're done grieving. Yeah. So Abel got married and he's all done grieving. Thank goodness we can all move through that now. And how you handled any expectations that people might have had around that.
Yeah, I think the biggest expectation I had to handle was with Julie, was with my living wife. I really, I think, we kind of, once I got remarried, we kind of moved away just because we wanted kind of a fresh start. And I think it was maybe setting expectations with her and her just kind of learning that, okay, Abel's having a moment, and, this isn't personal. This isn't a reflection of me or a reflection of our marriage. But just that Abel just needs a moment, and for me, the way I guess I grieved, I can see it now, but the way I was grieving at the time, it was really through anger, because again, my late wife had killed herself. I think there was just a lot of I had a lot of anger towards her. So I think Julie could tell there was times where I would just get something had triggered me. She wouldn't know what triggered me, but something had triggered me, and she could tell I was tensing up and I was angry. And so I think it was her just learning to say, okay, you know what, Abel needs a moment. I'm going to go to the other room, or I'm just going to give Abel a space, and things will be fine, in whatever 10 minutes or 20 minutes. But I just need, I think it was just trying to set those expectations with her that if I was triggered or something happening, this wasn't personal. This wasn't a reflection of her or our marriage or anything like that. It was just something I had to work through, and I learned to work through it, and then life would go back to normal.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like, it's always a part of who we are. And so, when the moments come, they come, and knowing that you have a supportive partner who's able to provide you the space that you need, or whatever support it is we need individually. Linda or Jill, I love that you brought up that you can be in a companionship and grieving at the same time. And you note that it's one of the things that is a misconception about grief, which was one of the things I had hoped to talk about. So I'd love to hear, just from your perspective, what is one of the common misconceptions of grief that and you've noted it here in the chat for anybody who'd like to take a look, but I'd love to hear you talk about it.
I used to be a hospice social worker and administrator. I did that for many, many years. And it was back in the day that every curriculum for hospice grief support groups, the first rule was, thou shalt not make any major changes for a year. Thou shalt not date. Thou shalt not establish a new relationship. And there is absolutely nothing in the research that supports that.
Mhm.
There is zero. There's a lot in the research that supports if someone especially has had a long grief process or coped maybe an Abel situation with someone who's had some mental health issues, that is so stressful that it's actually healthy to grieve in companionship with someone that you can love again. Our hearts are not pies. They don't, you know, you don't get little sections and only a little bit gets given away. You take that person with you. So the biggest misconception for me is when we tell people who are grieving that they are not allowed to date, not allowed to marry again, not allowed to be intimate again. Because when you lose an intimate partner and you're waking up to an empty bed every morning, it's just not, that's another extra loss. Intimacy loss is an extra loss when we lose a partner. And I think we need to be more supportive of folks making their own decisions. So Abel was ready earlier, Karla waited longer, you waited, it depends on the person.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up, because that's the thing, right? I always wished there was an exact way to do it, right? Wouldn't that be easy if there
There's
were
no
just a
cookbook.
list and you do exactly the things and then you can be done. But the truth is that every one of us experiences this differently. What we need, it can be dependent upon so many things, including how our person died, when our person died, how old were we, how old were they? Oh, I mean, there's just too many variables to even think that we could all do this a certain way. So on that note, I know we just have a few more minutes. So what I'd love to do is just ask each of you, what's one thing you would offer to someone who is widowed? You can choose newly widowed, but to support themselves. Like, what's one just small little nugget that you like to offer to somebody when they come to you and say, oh, I know a friend who's widowed. I'd love them to talk to you. Because I know that's happened to all of you. So when that happens, what is the thing that you say? Karla, I'd love to start with you.
I think it's just to give the person a safe space for you to just be a true listener, and with no judgments, no expectations, validate for them that wherever they are in their grief process, it is a process, it's not an event. Wherever they are is where they're meant to be right at this moment, and it's okay. And also to open up a space for the tears. The tears let the pain out, and that without letting that pain out through the tears, our journey might become a little more challenging. So I think just the listening and the validating.
Thank you. Abel?
I think I would kind of emphasize what Karla said, that it is a journey. It's not something that, again, it's not, there's not a bunch of things that you can just check off. It is a journey, but everything will eventually work out. Is that, just kind of figure out what this journey looks like for you, and take your time getting through it. But just knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that things will eventually work out, and you'll figure out what chapter 2 looks like, and you can still be happy and find joy again.
Thanks so much, Abel. Jill?
I'd like to tag on to both of them and adding that joy. And I like to make sure grievers know that it's okay to laugh. It's okay to smile. It's okay to go outside and feel sunshine and enjoy the sunshine, because that's healthy. You can still have moments where you cry, but if we don't let grievers have the full range of emotion, we lock them in to sadness, and that's not healthy. It's not good for us physically. It's not good for us emotionally. And we should be able to support people in doing the things they need to do, including laughing and telling silly stories about the person who died.
Yeah. And I'll say to wrap that up, I'll just say that my advice is always first to be so kind to yourself, because our harshest critics are often inside our heads. And also to allow yourself to make your own way. You don't have to do it the same way as someone else, and you don't have to follow things that don't feel true or right for you. I remember feeling like my inner voice was just, I couldn't hear it. And I felt like it was because the din of grief was so loud. But as I learned how to settle and listen to my inner voice, it became the place where I could determine whether the thing that was, suggested or I was doing felt like the right space for me. So For all of you who are experiencing widowhood, we just want you to know you've got a community of people who are hoping to offer you support and provide you with that light at the end of the tunnel, as Abel said.
The loss of a loved one can leave you feeling depressed, angry, alone, lost. But you don't have to face this journey on your own. Open to Hope is a free community for anyone who has experienced loss. Find support. Find help. Find hope. Give grief a voice at opentohope.com.